I guess we can start talking a little bit about the Cop City story while we wait for her just to intro it for you guys. In case you aren't familiar, you might have been hearing about the movement to stop Cop City in Atlanta, but maybe you aren't familiar with all of the details. So this is a pretty good article from the Atlanta Voice, which I think spells out exactly what the issue that these protesters have with the plan to build what they've called Cop City in the Atlanta forest. Cop City is an environmental nightmare and a threat to Black lives. As Black communities across the Gulf Coast rebuild and recover from the torrential rain and flooding worsened by climate change, the Atlanta City Council ignored thousands of their constituents who spoke out in opposition and gave the Atlanta Police Foundation the green light to clear cut the Atlanta forest to build a massive multi-million-dollar militarized police training facility nicknamed Cop City. This isn't just bad policy without transparency. It's a threat to the environment and to Black lives. And by the way, this is a reminder, a very, very sobering reminder of how important it is to elect the right people to your city council. Because as it says here, this was greenlit by the Atlanta City Council, in large part because many of the Atlanta City Council members are bought off by the corporations and the police, which are enabling the construction of this Cop City. So again, I think that's important information to know. And the site for this newly approved military-style facility will destroy the city's forest, Atlanta's main defense against flooding. Instead of safeguarding our infrastructure and protecting the city's essential green space, the priority is the militarization of the police that threatens the health and well-being of the city and its people. The Atlanta Police Foundation, backed by members of the city council and of corporate donors, is turning a vital green space, forest, and wetlands in southeast Atlanta into a $90 million complex for Atlanta police to rehearse state-sanctioned violence. This training facility, larger than 85 NFL football fields combined, speaking of the NFL, would include shooting ranges, spaces for militarized drills, and a mock city complete with buildings and roads to allow Atlanta Police Department to practice urban warfare tactics. The current plans for the facility would be larger than those of the NYPD and the LAPD put together. Atlantans don't want an overpriced police-centered military base in our backyards. Atlanta community members have been organizing to stop construction of this training facility for months. So I think it's, again, important to point out outline exactly what this plan entails. And I think what makes this protest movement so interesting also is that you see the convergence of the defund movement and the BLM movement, the movements against police brutality, converging with the environmentalist movement. So not only is this a massive threat to the marginalized communities of Atlanta, but it's also a massive environmental nightmare, as this headline says.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's such a great point. And I also want everybody to just recognize how divorced our public policy is from our public responses, right? I don't have to pull up pictures, although I can if nobody believes me, for you guys to visualize the flooding of the American streets, particularly those in Atlanta, but in all 50 states. People took to the streets and demanded a defunding of the police, a fundamental change to the way that we police in this country. And instead, what did they do? They built a fucking 85 football field size cop city to train people to intimidate, to train thugs to harass and murder people. Do you know how many innocent people the police killed in 2022, guys? 100 a month. It was 1,173 people were killed by the police last year. And now they're giving them a training facility so that they can go in there and feel like fucking, I don't know, Rambo or some shit and get all juiced up and jacked up and then be sent back out into our streets to terrorize us. That's what they're doing right here. And not only that, as Gavin mentioned, they're fucking destroying the very fragile ecosystem. If you guys haven't been paying attention to what's happening in California, that's coming for us in every single state because of climate change, because of bad decisions like this, because of our utter disdain and disregard for the planet and the people who inhabit it.
Absolutely. And it does look like our special guest is here. So without further ado, welcome back to the Vanguard, Olayemi Olurin. So pleased to see you again.
Hey, hi. And I think something worth a really strong point to point out. I think let me encourage everybody who wants to know more about Cop City. You should follow I Am King Williams on Instagram. He has a lot of info. But he says, for comparison, the Atlanta Police Department, even at full capacity, has only 2,000 officers, which pales in comparison to like 40,000 officers in NYPD and 10,000 officers in the LAPD. Yet the NYPD and LAPD are able to have training facilities at just 32 and 21 acres. Meanwhile, they're proposing for Cop City, they want to take 350 acres to create this massive city. And that isn't just that. We have to sit and look at that within the context of the fact that this is a city that's 50% Black, a city that as of 2021 is a 50% Black city. And now suddenly you need to create a mock city to test urban warfare that is triple, quadruple the size of far larger, bigger cities, police departments, training facilities. That is intentional. That is very, very deliberate. It's one thing to live in a police state, and this is clearly that. I mean, creating a calling something a cop city, they would think that that's something we came up with or something as activists or people to be like hyperbolic. No, they literally want to create a mock city, and it doesn't get any clearer that we live in a police state than that. But when you take the fact of where and why they're choosing to do it in Atlanta, that is important. That is important because it makes clear how policing and racism are intertwined. And also it's a whole larger conversation to be had about environmental racism, right? Because that's a whole another thing. I'll spare y'all, but I encourage you to watch a documentary called Smell of Money. And it looks at how down in the South, they put all these hog farms, intentionally all these, toxic places specifically on Black, like right around Black neighborhoods in a way that poisons and endangers Black people in specific. So if you look at the fact that they want to create right opposite on which is, it's also an important note, the land, not only do they want to tear down forest land, but this is also land that's on top of a former plantation and a former prison farm. So they want to take that and create this right opposite Atlanta's 50% Black city and create literally here a bunch of police. Let's create a massive police force where they have all this urban warfare and tactics. So who are they going to use it on? And then if you look at the fact that just in defending it, they've already killed a protester. They've literally killed a protester in order to defend their right to create this city where they could test out these urban warfare tactics. So who is that for and why is that for? And who is that going to turn back on? And it's going to be the Black residents of Atlanta.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to get a little bit more into the assassination of this activist. The police are saying that he fired at them first, but have yet to provide any evidence for that claim, and have so far not been able to produce any body cam footage. Mysteriously, that seems to have disappeared, or they just didn't have them on in the first place. So highly, highly suspect as far as their narrative goes. And yeah, this is quite tragic. This story in The Guardian details the plight of this young activist and that of his mother as well, who's coming to the U.S. in order to try to clear their name and, fight back against this narrative that's been painted of their child. So as it says here, Belkis Tehran spoke with her child Manuel nearly every day by WhatsApp from her home in Panama City. She also had the name and numbers for some of Manuel's friends in case she didn't hear from the 26-year-old who was protesting Cop City, a planned gigantic training facility being built in a wooded area near Atlanta, Georgia. By the midweek, when she still hadn't received a message from Atlanta, she began to worry. Thursday around noon, a friend of Manuel's, whose chosen name is Tortuguita, messaged her with condolences. "I'm so sorry," they wrote, "for what she asked." Tehran wound up discovering that on Wednesday around 9 a.m., as of yet unnamed officers had shot and killed her son. The shooting occurred in an operation involving dozens of officers from Atlanta police. The killing has stunned and shocked not only Tortuguita's family and friends, but also environmentalist and social justice movements in Georgia and across the United States. Circumstances surrounding the incident are still unclear, and there's demands for a thorough investigation into the killing and how it could have happened. Officials say Manuel shot first at a state trooper without warning, and officers returned fire, but they have produced no evidence for the claim. And again, also no body cam footage has yet been produced. The shooting is unprecedented in the history of U.S. environmental activism, according to experts. So pretty crazy stuff. And again, it's obviously tragic that this activist was murdered by these police for merely trying to defend the Atlanta forest and prevent the construction of this monstrosity, this monument to police violence and to the police state that we live in. But I guess the silver lining of this is that it has brought a lot more attention to the cause and has caused protests to erupt all across the nation.
What's really heartbroken and a really underexplored reality of police brutality in America is that when police don't just murder people, and they often don't alert their loved ones. Like, this isn't like, especially if they are foreign or there's any kind of language barrier, and that is a really painful reality. We saw that a lot with Rikers here. Like, Latino people who are incarcerated Rikers would die and they wouldn't even bother to get an English translator, let their mothers know. And that is hard. As someone whose parents live in a different country and do rely on messages from WhatsApp, I can't imagine like my mom getting a message like that. Is so painful. I can't even for that woman. And now you have to deal with the added level of, they're going to vilify your son, they're going to create all these narratives. Because, and here's the thing, we don't talk about what it means to live in a police state enough, because if you really had a body of people that were there to protect and serve the community, if that's the purpose of them, if the community look at Atlanta is 50% Black, 20% of the people live in poverty, and 70% of Atlanta residents are not in favor of Cop City. They do not want it. So how is it possible that you're protecting and serving a community who you are ignoring, whose needs, wants, position, and messaging you are not only ignoring, but you are violently ignoring? They have been protesting this for months, and people have taken up residence in the forest, and you will enter fully prepared to murder people in order to have a facility that you claim you want us to believe is there to protect and serve us, while you are killing Atlanta residents in order to practice urban warfare tactics you're going to use in those residents. But that's not a police state. It's heartbreaking. It really is heartbreaking. And someone shouldn't have to be martyred for a cause. Like, that's the messed up part. Yeah. This boy shouldn't have to lose his life. This man shouldn't have to have lost his life to hope something get a little bit more awareness. You would think. It's unfortunate, even a media that constantly talks about policing, talks about propaganda, talks about this, that constantly wants to fear and alarm us around defund the police, completely just doesn't even bother to address Cop City. They could literally be making a 350-acre city for policing and for practicing warfare tactics. People could be protesting it day and night, and you barely hear a word about it on mainstream media coverage. All the while, they're continuing to scare you that the protesters, the same protesters that they're killing and beating and maiming, at random as they feel willingly, those are the people that are defunding the police. Meanwhile, look at what's happening. The police state is literally widening and expanding right in front of our eyes.
Absolutely. And I thought this was, worth mentioning as well, as far as Tortuguita's mother saying that she's going to clear Manuel's name. They killed him like they tear down trees in the forest, a forest Manuel loved with passion. So again, just such tragic stuff. And yeah, it's heartbreaking that not only does she have to find out about her child's death this way, but now has to come and, try to clear his name and prove that he wasn't being violent and that he was quite literally the victim of a political assassination.
Right.
And as I said, there have been protests kind of erupting nationwide since the murder of Tortuguita. Cop City protests go nationwide after shooting in Atlanta. Activists in Atlanta and across the United States are gathering in support of a protester who was shot and killed on January 18th on property where the city of Atlanta plans to build a massive public safety training center. That's one way to put it. Well, we understand this is a local issue. We also know this is a national problem. This is a global problem, said Jasmine Burnett, organizing director of Community Movement Builders, an Atlanta-based Black-led collective that organizes against gentrification. Organizers from Berkeley to Charlotte are ramping up protests and candlelit vigils to defend the forest and stop Cop City. 50 demonstrators gathered outside the construction firm Brassfeld and Gorey in Charlotte in June of 2022. The following month, the doors were chained with bike locks, according to the Charlotte Observer. More gatherings are planned for this week in Atlanta and beyond. So I guess one question I had for you, Olayemi, is do you think this could kind of result in a real nationwide movement, kind of a resparking of what we saw after the murder of George Floyd?
I could hope so, but I think our movements have to be. It has to be more central to how we go about galvanizing attention around movements in terms of our messaging. Like, it's easy to get people to come out because someone was shot and killed, right? But what we need to make them understand is the cause itself. You need to make them understand what's so important and what's happening here and why this is a big deal, right? Like, you need to have the conversation about, because people turn a blind eye to things that don't immediately sensationalize their feelings, and they also don't learn the information necessary to create the change that prevents the thing that sensationalizes their feelings, right? Because we have to have a conversation. It can't be divorced from a conversation around environmental racism, right? We have to talk about the fact that in our current times already, with everything we know about climate and the state of the world, that tearing down this forest land that is right there in Atlanta, this large amounts of forest land. Also, the forest is there. It prevents flooding. It prevents overheating, all these different things. So there's also ways in which that, like, we're not just saying it's racist because, oh, you're doing something to the environment and Black people happen to be there. We're trying to show you how this is intertwined. So I think if we wanted to create, the issue has never been that we don't have mass amounts of people that think it's wrong when they hear a story about police killing someone, and they're like, oh, my heart goes out to that. That's wrong. That's bad. The issue is that we don't have enough people that support the reasoning, the underlying reasoning, the different things that we need to get rid of the police presence there or have a problem. We can't have people that say, oh my God, the police shouldn't have killed that guy, but then still support Cop City. You see what I'm saying? So we need to make sure that is stable. And we don't do enough of that, right? It's not enough for us to get and say, oh, it's wrong that police killed George Floyd. We need to talk about the fact where policing is being put, right? Why are these neighborhoods over police? Why police are being called in these scenarios? But we often don't have that. So that's the gap. And then we'll think, oh, look how we had all this momentum for this thing, and then we didn't accomplish it. We never had the momentum for the right thing. You see what I mean? We have momentum for the feeling of the outrage, like this guy is dead. He shouldn't be dead. But when it comes to any of the things that we need to support or we need to not support in order to have prevented his death, we haven't actually created the messaging around there. So I think we can see uproar and outrage, but what we really need to do besides backlash is we need to make sure, take this opportunity, educate people to what the problem is and not just throw it out there. Like, we can't just say, oh, stop Cop City. They're trying to create Cop City. Let's tell you why that's bad, why that is a police state, what a police state is. We also have to stop assuming people know these words that we know. You know what I'm saying? Like, we have to be prepared to explain it. Like, all right, this is why I'm telling you this is environmental racism. This is why it's that, not me just using the title. Let's make sure we take this momentum and educate people around what the actual issue is. We don't need people to just go out and say justice for Manuel. We need them to say justice for Manuel and stop Cop City. You see what I'm saying? And not just so.
Yeah. And I think that on the flip side of that, one of the things that the fucking cops have done so well, and you know, we can talk about the legal ramifications of this, which I think we should, but also just the rhetorical ramifications of labeling these protesters domestic terrorists, right? Because it creates an immediate association with particularly white America, suburban white America, that these people are bad, that these people are destructive. And it kind of, it just kind of plays off of the same, like the 90s fear mongering of what they already think of the inner city, right? And now it's like, oh, these domestic terrorists, these environmental terrorists, and it just combines all of the fear mongering that they've fed people for the last couple of decades.
And isn't that funny that you could be a domestic terrorist by trying to protect the land, by trying to protect the land, you're a domestic terrorist. But we could see tons of people go and swarm the Capitol looking to go kill politicians. And did you see domestic terrorism? Did you see any of those charges? Did you see treason? All of a sudden, they couldn't find anything but misdemeanors to charge them with. All of a sudden, they don't know nothing about felony murder. But when it's time to hold protesters responsible for how they respond to environments and situations that the police create, then they're domestic terrorists. Why is it not taken into consideration the fact that these people are occupying this space? You know they're there, and you know the majority of the city's inhabitants who you allegedly are supposed to be serving support them being there and don't support you being there, but you invade the place armed with weapons and you kill somebody and they're charged with domestic terrorism. And that is just a microcosm of how we allow policing and police brutality to play out all around the country. Police do these things, they create these environments, and then they charge the other people. And we always see this when it comes to protests. I think about the Ferguson protest with Joshua Williams, who is still incarcerated because he lit a trash can on fire. So these are the things that they do.
Yeah. Go ahead, Gavin.
Oh, you can go.
I was just going to follow up and ask if, once they do provide people with that legal definition of like a domestic terror charge, right? Could you talk about, like, as an attorney, how that makes your case like basically super incendiary? Like, you could be looking at like a decade of your life gone, and the way that would intimidate people from engaging in these kinds of counter protests.
Overcharging. Yeah. Overcharging is, that's what the prosecutor's offices do in general, because overcharging is what makes people more likely to take a lower plea. They fear, they participate. This obviously, in the case of protesters, they always try to make an example out of people. They're always trying to dissuade people. It's not a coincidence. We come in, these people have been protesting this major thing we want to do. So we come in as police and we murder somebody and we charge everybody else with domestic terrorism. That is obviously there to make an example out of them. Don't do this. It's to dissuade other people from taking up this cause. So there's definitely that. And just in terms of how it plays out in court is, and I haven't looked into what's happened since, I know they were charged with domestic terrorism, but I don't know if they were arraigned or released or what happened, but or how, or even what Atlanta criminal law is, because obviously it's different than in New York. But if they're charged with something more serious, just by charging them with a more serious charge, now you've made it more likely that they get bail set on them. Now they're incarcerated. They don't have money for that, and now they're more likely to take a plea, or they sit in jail for years on end waiting for a trial and all these different things. And all of those things quash the momentum and the heart of a movement. You know what I mean? It dissuades, and it also saddles all their community with other problems, right? Because if all the people that you're in community with, you're living with, that you're leading this movement with, that you're doing your activism with, are in jail now, or even if they're out, they're fighting criminal charges, and now you have to deal with that. That has to come from somewhere. You have to create the infrastructure, and that's going to slow down what you're able to do in terms of your larger movement. So all of that is a deliberate way in which the state uses its power to quash movements.
Absolutely. And I totally agree with what you were saying earlier about how this movement and the protests that are erupting in the wake of Tortuguita's murder can't just be based around solely the cry for justice for this young man who was murdered, but it needs to be about the fundamental reforms necessary and the defunding of the police. And I do have to say that I think that in many ways this story is kind of the perfect one to spark exactly that conversation, because you can't just reduce this story down to, oh, it was one bad apple, this was one bad cop within a system which is fundamentally reformable, anything like that. I mean, this entire story, a $90 million training complex for Atlanta police to, as this article says, rehearse state-sanctioned violence that will be larger than 85 NFL football fields combined. Combine that with the environmental aspect of this and the deforestation aspect of this. It really is like the perfect story to illustrate just how grossly overfunded our police departments are, and the threat that they represent, not just to human life, but to the environment and the country we all live in.
Absolutely. In a city where 20% of the people are in poverty, and a lot of the advocates and the actual city residents, by the way, this land that all of this is about, this land has apparently been in dispute for decades. Apparently this is a thing between DeKalb and Atlanta, and different constituents and people want the land to be used for affordable housing. So instead of taking in a city with 50% of the city is Black, 20% of the people are in poverty, and instead of taking this land and using it for affordable housing, you want to use it to create more policing, to create a large cop city for them to test out this danger to their detriment, which is absurd, which is absolutely absurd. But then on top of that, when you think about the way poverty and all these different things, policing and institutional racism and poverty are all intertwined, because now, not only have you done this, you're going to take this and create this cop city, but by tearing down all this forest land and you're going to cause more flooding, you're going to cause more heating. And these poor residents, these poor Black residents of Atlanta, what happens now when they're dealing with way more flooding, way more property damage, and way more issues? What happens then? Are they going to be able, do they have the resources to rebuild? Do they have the resources to address these things? Are not more lives going to be lost in addition to poverty, but the flooding and everything else that's going to come with that? It is a large, complex way that, systemic racism harms people.